So Bill is going to come over and, and he's going to pick out the winning ticket. This is sponsored by Microsoft, okay, a Surface Pro with accessories.
And surely her name is not here. I'll show you my name is not here. There we are.
Would you like to announce it, Bill?
It is Jane McCormack from Gormanston College. Jane McCormack, is she here? She's after going. Okay,
so
we have the details.
Thank you, Bill. Right, so we have her details, and we'll be giving that to Microsoft, and they will be shipping it out and in touch with Jane, okay? Are you a friend of Jane's? Okay. So, I've known this gentleman here. There's a lot of gentlemen in my life, and this gentleman I met several years ago. And it was a pleasure. The first day I met him, and it's still a pleasure, so it is. Okay. And he is the team leader, I'm sure you all know, of the JCT Maths team. And Shane has kindly given up his Saturday evening here to tell you all and give you insights into the new junior cycle framework. Okay, so over to you, Shane.
Okay. Thanks, Anne. I suppose the first thing I need to do is thank you all for staying back. I know it's been a long day, a rewarding day, or 2 days, and I definitely have you out of here by 6 o'clock. There's no question of that. No, in all seriousness, and thanks for laughing at my joke, it is actually a genuine honour and privilege to come and speak here today, and I want to thank Anne for asking me here. And I suppose when I'm walking around over the last 2 days and watching Professor Tad, I'm going to say Professor Tad, but that's okay, watch him teach, watch the live lessons from our own homegrown teachers, and indeed the workshops, I'm truly humbled. You know, walking around and seeing the kind of professional learning that has happened as a result of lesson study, and its rollout over not just this year but all of the other years, seeing how it has grown, and imagining the learning that has taken place in Irish classrooms as a result, you know, not just from those individual lessons, but how it seeps over and spills into everything that we do. So I think it would probably be only right and fitting that, you know, we acknowledge all of the hard work, the dedication, not just Anne and Stephen and Aidan, but the associates and the teachers who give up all of their time, their evenings, the unglamorous side of lesson study, as Anne calls it, so as that this glamorous bit can happen. So maybe a round of applause for the team. So I suppose I'd like to talk to you today about maths in the context of the junior cycle framework or junior cycle reform. And I was having a think, and I think it's only sensible that we begin by answering a question. And it's not a question that we've been asked, myself and the team, that often out and about as we're delivering, but it is a question we've been asked once or twice. And the question is all the work that we've done with Project Maths and the Maths development team now redundant? And the simple answer is no. In fact, it's my contention that the work that's been done over the past 10 years is actually now more important than ever. Because lesson study and the maths reform that has taken place over the last 10 years and the learning that has taken place will go hand in hand with not just junior cycle reform as a whole and what junior cycle reform looks to achieve, but also when we dig down a little deeper into the math space and what we want to achieve, they go hand in hand, they complement each other, and I think that they bolster each other. At the same time, hopefully by the time you walk out this evening, you might just, I suppose the questions that were asked of our practice over recent years, I suppose I would hope that junior cycle reform will continue, and I think it will, and I hope to convince you of that it will continue to ask those questions of our professional practice. So I have some things that I'm going to talk to you about today, just general talking points. Very briefly about junior cycle reform, get straight into a little bit on maths. But I think I suppose given the nature of junior cycle reform and what it brings, formative assessment here is something that I'm going to flag straight away and say that this is something, it's new in inverted commas, but it's there for us, and I'm definitely going to address it a little bit. So I have two slides, this one and the next one, that crop up in almost every junior cycle for teachers support service in service. You know, be it whole school, subject, leadership, or any of the electives. And this is what we're looking to achieve. And it's important to refocus our attention on this, I think, because sometimes we can get lost in, I suppose, all the logistical changes and the management that comes with trying to, you know, make this reform happen. But I think when we look back at this and we say, is this something that we want for our students? Is this something that we want to achieve? And sometimes, maybe when we get bogged down in all of the logistical stuff, this might bring us back to where we need to be so that we can keep going. I'm not going to read it to you, but it's quite simply a balance between subject knowledge and developing thinking abilities. Again, this is probably a slide that you've seen, so I won't dwell on it. Some people have. I know from talking to people, some people have seen it, some people haven't. They haven't managed to get to cluster day. They're doing science or they're doing business studies, etc. But this sort of summarises junior cycle reform in many ways. We've got our principles, our statements of learning, and our key skills, and that's our curriculum. And collectively, they represent a body of transferable skills and knowledge that we would like our students to leave junior cycle with and progress into senior cycle or wherever they may go. Maths is one of the lenses through which our students will experience the curriculum. Of course, up at the top, we've got changes to assessment and reporting. Some of them that we're quite familiar with. I suppose we know classroom-based assessment is coming down the tracks for us. And we know that we've got the junior cycle profile of achievement that people are working with. But in that assessment space, though, it's not just the practicalities. I think we have to remind ourselves that formative assessment is something that's been built in as well. So sort of we've assessment with a capital A, the one that the profile of achievement or the state exams reporting. But then we've assessment more generally, day to day in the classroom, and we need to have a think about what that's going to look like. So, our maths, again, maybe a familiar slide. This is what our specification says. Maths is underpinned by the conception that is an interconnected body of ideas. And we've a piece on our day where, on our day one, which some of you have experienced, where we invite people to sort of place the learning outcomes in certain areas. But we actually don't really mind if they don't go in the right places. What we're actually asking teachers to do is identify, blur the lines, where are the connections across the strands and within the strands. And there's no question but that teachers know where the connections are. They know how to link strands. They tell us on the day, we have conversations about it. But very often part of that conversation leads back to students, as it naturally should. And the question is asked, or there's a statement made, and it says, well, we absolutely know where the connections are, but I'm not sure that our students always see the connections. Another, and I suppose we might chat about that later on as well. Another, it's not highlighted, but another, I suppose, important feature, couple of words, independent learners, just at the end. We have another piece in our day where we ask people, I suppose it's a little bit of blue sky thinking, and we ask people, what would you ultimately want? No, nothing to stop you. Every single cluster, and I mean this without exception, every single room of teachers that we have been in, without exception, has said that they would want their students to be independent learners. And I suppose the fact that teachers are saying and identifying these things, but also being honest enough with us to say that maybe it's not always happening, means that we have to ask ourselves the question, how can we progress? It's happening sometimes, but it's not happening often enough, is what teachers are telling us. We need to think about how we can push that forward. So learning outcomes. All specifications in junior cycle are written in terms of learning outcomes. Okay? All of them. And I suppose on our day, we ask people to unpack learning outcomes. Everything is being unpacked at the moment these days. All over the world, everybody's unpacking everything in business and everywhere, and we're no different. But we ask people to, I suppose, break down the learning outcome, dissect it, unpack it, with a particular emphasis on understanding. Because if you want to teach students for understanding, well, then you need to identify what it is you want them to understand, and then that will ultimately inform your practice in classrooms and what we do. And I believe that if we teach for understanding as often as we can, because I'm practical enough, I understand the pressures of the classroom, but if we can keep our focus as often as we can on teaching for understanding, I believe that the knowledge, the skills and the values will sort of come from that. So this idea of unpacking learning outcomes leads me on to teacher collaboration, because it's one of the things that we look for teachers to do. We say that, and we're asking them when they go back into their classrooms, sit down with your specification, have a look at the learning outcomes, pull them apart. What do you actually want your students to understand? That's not an easy process. That's, I suppose, the message we're getting back. And I suppose one of the concerns for teachers as well, as they're saying, well, we have to plan. But we would contend, and I would contend, that if you don't unpack the learning, if you don't start to analyse and dissect the learning outcomes for understanding, we're missing a beat. I'd also suggest, or I believe, that the last part here, learning outcomes, teacher collaboration, is essential when unpacking learning outcomes. Absolutely it is. But I think it's essential for planning. I think it's essential for assessment, both big A and small a, you know, the summative stuff and the formative stuff that happens in classes day to day. In task design, lesson design, everything. And when there's clear structures and norms in place, teacher collaboration is transformative. There's no both inside and outside of the classroom. And I suppose that's one of the things that junior cycle reform is looking to do, is to bring teacher collaboration to the forefront of the system and of what people do. I suppose outside of the classroom, and I think the people in the room, there's no question, you probably have experienced this, outside of, because you're engaged in teacher collaboration. That is one of the hallmarks, I think, of lesson study. It's one of the fantastic things about it. But I suppose outside of the classroom, it leads to high quality, meaningful and deep discussions between teachers about teaching, learning and assessment. And it moves from maybe beyond a space where how much did you get done, what chapter are you on, which is relevant and important, but it moves into a space where, well, how did you teach that? What did they understand? Did you find that worked? I didn't. How can we make it better? You know, a real examination of our practice. And ultimately inside the classroom it leads to more high quality and better and rich learning experiences for our students. Of course, the ultimate goal in teacher collaboration, without a doubt, is teacher observation, and I think we've had that in spades over the last 2 days. You know, there's no question. I suppose in my mind, getting teachers in to observe each other teaching and learn from one another is the holy grail. If we can do it, if we can push it out into the system, I think the world's our oyster in many ways. Framework for Junior Cycle acknowledges collaboration between teachers for informing their understanding, again in terms of teaching, learning and assessment. So maybe some nuts and bolts. Enough of the, you're saying to yourself, yeah. Some nuts and bolts. Okay. Well, the specification has familiar strands. Okay, you probably know that. Algebra and functions have merged into a single strand. That's kind of in line with best international practice. Again, there's nobody who really thinks that that's not a good idea. Common introductory course is no longer a requirement. Okay. I just saw somebody bless themselves. And what does that mean for us? Well, it means that we have scope. Scope to create a program of learning for our students that's tailored to their strengths and needs, specifically to their strengths and needs. It's a fantastic opportunity. We're not curriculum designers because we have a curriculum, we have a specification, but we do get to design how our students experience it, and that's fantastic. And central, I think, going forward to the design and how our students experience maths will be the unifying strand, and I suppose that's what I'm going to take a look at with you for a few minutes. So we have our contextual strands, you're probably familiar with that. We have this unifying strand, and we'll get into it in a little bit more detail, and it permeates the contextual strands. And I do a lot of thinking about it, as I'm sure you can imagine, and sometimes it feels as if it's not tangible. You know, this thing that weaves its way through all of the contextual strands. And if it's not tangible, well, how is it learnable? Is learnable a word? I don't know. I learned the other day that learnification is a word, so maybe learnable is a word too. Is it learnable for our students? Is it teachable by teachers? Is teachable a word? I don't know. But there is a structure that will help us. So we've got elements of our unifying strand, and you can see the 6 of them there. And there's no specific content. We'll take a look at some of these in a few minutes. It contains learning outcomes. And this is a line from the specification. The elements of the unifying strand, they're interdependent. Sorry for reading it to you, but so that students develop them in unison rather than isolation. But this last line from the specification, again, I kind of grapple with it as well, because I totally get that they're interdependent and they should be developed in unison. But in practical terms, bringing it into a classroom, I'm not sure that that's as easy to do. But what I am sure is that when we're planning for our classes, for our lessons and whatnot, maybe we need to be very clear on the elements that we're trying to engage our students in. And we need to explicitly tell them, you know, and we need to explicitly inform them about the skills and what it is that they're actually going to be learning. And to be fair, I think with everything that we've seen today and yesterday, there's no question that it can be done. No question whatsoever. So what I'd like you to do for a moment, this is just for a moment, have a think back over the lessons that you've seen today and yesterday evening. Just for a minute. Have a think about maybe one that really caught your eye, whatnot, and just maybe have a look at, this is the problem-solving element from the unifying strand. Just maybe have a little think, what stands out? Are students engaging in these learning outcomes? I think you'll probably find that they were. Parts or all. And then just on to generalization and proof and communication. In bucket loads, I would suggest. Bucket loads. You know, Professor Watanabe's lesson, for me in particular, the generalization and proof, those 2 learning outcomes, I mean, just read them and think about that lesson. Generate mathematical statements or conjectures based on specific instances. Fabulous. Generate and evaluate mathematical arguments. Absolutely. Okay. So I suppose, you know, I'm going somewhere with all of this. Formative assessment, new and junior cycle. Very clearly laid out in the framework. Formative complemented by summative, be a key feature. And this is what formative assessment, I suppose, a definition, a fairly well-regarded definition. And I'm not going to read it to you, I'm not going to get into it in too much depth, but I would contend that it's just responsive teaching, responding to the needs of your learners, taking them where they need to go, gathering some evidence. We won't get too bogged down in the word evidence, not that it has to be recorded, but just gathering some information so as that we can target the learning and move things forward. I think we saw some very, very manageable and practical ways of doing that in Professor Watanabe's lesson. He moves around the room, and again, anyone who's trained in lesson study or is trained as an associate will know this. Moving around the room with purpose. That's one of the things I learned. I did a lot of walking around rooms, keeping people quiet. Do you know what I mean? I didn't really care. Not that I didn't care, but my mind wasn't open to it. I wasn't watching necessarily what they were doing. I wasn't filtering out what they were getting right, what they were getting wrong, and then using it to inform where I was going to go with the lessons. Again, you saw Professor Watanabe take reflections at the end of the lessons, and then use that to inform what he was going to do. So formative assessment in many ways is just responsive teaching. Okay. We do it. There's no question that we do it. But there are, I suppose, there's a structure on it. There are some pillars. So I'm going to talk you through some of these pillars and then maybe pose a question or two. Not the first one, but a pillar. Clarifying, understanding, sharing the learning intentions. Let the students in on the secret. Where are they going? What are they doing? Why are they learning what they're learning? What will it ultimately lead to? Or what are they trying to achieve or accomplish? Let them in on the secret. I suppose in practical terms in classrooms, learning intentions can be used at the start, during or at the end, to summarise or facilitate the learning going forward. But I don't think there's any I don't know if there's an inspector here, but not that it was something we know there's an inspection happening, so we start to put them on the boards 3 weeks before. If we're going to do it, it should have meaning and it should focus the learning, and we should use it. And get, I suppose, bang for our buck, as I've heard someone say before. Classroom discussion. Get our students talking to each other, talking to us, explaining their reasoning, using appropriate mathematical and accurate mathematical language, asking questions that stretch our students. We need to plan a little bit for that. I suppose we all have our thing, and Anne knows that one of my things is questioning, and I suppose anybody who gets talking to me will know that's what I tend to bang on about a little bit and harp on about a little bit. But there were some fantastic examples of questioning that draw out conversation from students. Are you convinced? I just jotted a few down. Are you convinced is something I heard quite often being asked to students yesterday evening and this morning. What's the same? What's different? What's your conclusion? And is there another way? So drawing out, not giving answers easily to students, but encouraging them and drawing out conversation and dialogue. Feedback? I'm not going to get stuck into all of these. And activating students as resources for one another. That's an interesting one. Because it doesn't mean, I suppose, that students are teaching students. That's not what it means. But it is an acknowledgement that they can learn from each other. And our job, or one of our roles, I suppose, and it will be a key feature of junior cycle, maths in junior cycle, will be to provide or create opportunities for that to happen. And then we're there to monitor the conversation and make sure it's at a standard that we're happy with and that's appropriate. And I suppose this is, I was here last night and I knew the screens were very big, and I had 2 slides saying the same thing because I was afraid that people mightn't be able to read this if the screen was too small, but that's not a problem. But I decided to leave it in because very often the pillars are displayed exactly as I have, either as bullet points or in a cycle. But that tends to, I suppose, lead to a very mechanical approach to these things that are associated with formative assessment, that you start and you move from one to the other, where in actual fact all of these can happen and tend to happen in classrooms simultaneously. And there is, I suppose, an implied cyclical process, but I prefer to think of them as lenses through which we can continue to examine our practice in classrooms. And we're very used to this. We've been doing it. We've been doing it through lesson study. We've been doing it with all through the reform over the last 10 years. And I suppose a very simple example, if we want our students to become more independent, or, as we say, owners of their own learning, how can we make it happen, or how can we further it? We need to start asking ourselves some of these questions. So we have the unifying strand, aims, formative assessment. We've all of these things that we have to try and build in and weave into day-to-day practice. And is there a way to do it? And I think there is. So carefully designed rich learning experiences offers the opportunity to students to develop a balance of, well, you can read it there. So rich learning experiences. And I suppose, I think everything that we've seen today and yesterday, in my mind, is a rich learning experience for the student. But I think it's important, though, to draw a distinction about where it comes from, because lesson study and the lessons that have been generated and rolled out in schools and used in schools and evaluated comes from a very specific process, that a CPD framework lesson study, and they are research lessons. And I think it's important to understand and acknowledge that that's where they come from. But I also think that the end product, that what is produced in my book, is very definitely a rich learning experience. And I suppose the word rich, because this is another bit like unpacking. Unpacking is a word we're using a lot at the moment. Rich is a word that we're using a lot at the moment. So I thought maybe we'd just explore this a little bit. And as things crop up, I hope you'll start to see commonalities across all of these three things. And I want to, I suppose, apologise in advance for the next slide. I'm known on the team for my ability to pack a slide with words. Okay? If you want a wordy slide, you come and ask me. I'll wordy it up for you, no problem. So this is very wordy, but I wanted all of this on, I suppose, in one place. So what's a rich task, or a rich lesson, or a rich learning experience? I tend to use them interchangeably. It doesn't really bother me too much, but it probably should. Multiple entry points, multiple solutions. No doubt in my mind that we've seen that today. Challenges and be extendable. We have that. Invite decision making by students individually and collaboratively. If we want our students to be independent, we have to ask them, invite them to make some decisions. There's loads that we could add in here. I just put in reasoning and generalization, I suppose. It's not quite a summary, but they're things that we definitely want. Allow learners to search in other directions. So the questions that what we put in front of our students should allow them to start to make the connections. Because if we're telling them, and we're telling them, and we're telling them, and what I'm hearing back from teachers is that they're still not necessarily seeing it, well then what are we putting in front of them that allows them to make those connections? And again, we have a multitude of examples that we've seen over the last few days, yesterday and today. We have that. Wouldn't this be fantastic? Isn't this what maths is about? And have an element of surprise. And I just wrote down, because again, Professor Watanabe's lesson, the students were surprised to learn that there are infinitely many fractions between any two fractions. I wasn't surprised to learn it, but I was surprised that it could be taught that way. You know, I thought it was fantastic. So it should have an element of surprise. And of course, we'd like it to be enjoyable. And that's I suppose it's old, but it's adapted. Rich tasks should be motivated by curricular content and real life situations, or real life or real world problems. And I suppose more generally then in our classrooms, because I absolutely understand the need, practical, to be practical. But in our lessons generally, we should try and reduce scaffolding and be mindful, particularly in relation to our exceptionally able students, of whether we're extending, accelerating, or enriching. So it's just getting close to wrapping up, but just this one here about real life or real world problems, I suppose leads us on to the CBAs that are coming down the track for us, you know. And there's some details there. We know it's a mathematical investigation, wide range of formats, and there's a cycle. Happen at the end of second year, and there'll be a SLAR meeting. I suppose the SLAR meeting would be a mechanism of junior cycle to encourage collaboration. And again, I just popped this here. And I think CBAs are very definitely opportunities for rich learning, and they hopefully they will provide an opportunity for students to take the learning that they have based from their curricular content and apply it, and move, I suppose, flexibly and seamlessly between those two, and see the value in what they're learning in maths classes. Not that they don't see the value already, but that it will have a more intrinsic value for them. But I do think we must maintain the integrity and the complex nature of problem solving. And I think we should avoid experiences that are going to be overly contrived or that become a tick box, because it could become that, and I think we need to avoid that. We need to guard against that. We have a second CBA, or statistical investigation. This will happen at the end of first term and third year, and of course there will be a SLAR. And again, this inquiry cycle, many moons ago, the Project Maths team talked about the PCAI cycle, and here we have it. It was the forerunner to it. So teachers have been engaging with this and well prepared. So I suppose I have some final remarks, and I thought, you know what, maybe some quotes, because I need something profound. I'm not a profound kind of guy, so a couple of remarks I thought, so I thought of this. If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. And as my mother, probably your mothers have said the same thing, but she said it very regularly to me. I was going to put up a picture of a wooden spoon, but I didn't. And then I suppose I found something on my phone that I had taken a snap of, because the best part of my job is going out to talk to teachers and going into schools and classrooms and talking about maths, obviously. And I saw on a wall this. We only think when we're confronted with a problem. And it just made me think back to the aims or the rationale of the specification and about that interconnected body, And if I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. How can we achieve what we're trying to set out to achieve? So there were my two quotes, but I have another one, because somebody said it to me this morning. I was having a chat. I think this is important. I like to think it is anyway. Everything I say is important. What this gentleman said to me, we were having a good chat about all of this, and what he said was, you know what, I think we're ahead of the curve. And I think we are. I think we're ahead of the curve in terms of what is espoused by junior cycle reform, because of all of the work that has been done. He said, but he followed it up and he said, but we can't rest on our laurels. We can't stop now. We have to keep going. And I just thought that was really, 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 really important. That's it. I'm finished. Thank you.
Right, I'd like to thank Shane for that. I think we've got some very interesting insights, and certainly was informative for me. I need to catch up a little bit, don't I? I did all my thank yous last night, but there are a few people, and first one, of course, is Grania Hockney over here. Myself and Grania. We've soldiered for 10 years now, and let me tell you, I have never met a woman who can organise anything as well as Grania. She has organised everything for the last 10 years. And I think she's better known than any of us in this room. Everyone knows Grania Hockney, so they do. I'd also like to thank the other two men in my life, and it's not my son or my husband, but it's Stephen and Aidan, right? I've been just so lucky to have got those two guys in my life over the last few years, right? And I know they hate being thanked. And last but not least, our esteemed guest, Professor Tad Watanabe. Not only did he come in March, but he made sure he flew in yesterday morning from America, and he's away off early in the morning. He really did put himself out to come back to us. And I'll tell you what, you just struck another chord in our hearts this time again, Tad, and we wish you the very safest journey home, okay? could make you an honorary citizen of Ireland, we would, okay? We do love you over here, okay? So look, it's safe home, everybody. Once again, thanks to Shane and all of you for coming, and as I said, safe journey, okay? Thank you. Oh, and I meant to thank the camera crew, I'm sorry, and the sound. Sorry.